Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Doctor Suit. It's me, Mohit, and my co-host Sharon, and we have Ati today to really discuss about the regulatory science in the healthcare space. So, Ati, how are you doing today?
I'm good, and thank you for having me on this podcast. I'm really excited to talk about quality and regulatory and how it weaves in the medical device
Yeah,
development process.
we are really excited for you to be here today. So, Ati, let me just introduce Ati, in fact. So, Ati is a master's student in Northeastern University, and she brings a wealth of experience in the regulatory science space and quality control itself. Her journey began in India, where she worked in a lab, eventually working in an incubator and working for several healthcare startups, which are currently in the Fortune 500 space. Eventually, Ati went on to do her master's in regulatory science and quality, and brings a wealth of experience in how to really tackle the various regulations that the healthcare space is currently facing. So, Ati, I just wanted to understand what really triggered your interest throughout this journey itself. Like, how was
Um,
your journey from India to US? That's very exciting.
yeah, as you might know, like the medical device space in India is very recent. In fact, like from a regulatory perspective, the latest rules were released in 2017, so it's not really that new. As I mean, that old. I mean. So when I was working like in the lab, as you mentioned, as like I was working on protein biology mostly, and it was mostly academic, I kind of felt that um, I wanted to explore a more holistic approach in the industry in general. And I found this startup incubator near my lab, and I started volunteering there as a like someone who can help with quality and regulatory aspects for some of the medical device startups which were just framing their ideas so that they were like prototyping their devices and things like that, and they had like questions on like, hey, I want to launch this in India, like what are the greater goals that I have to keep in mind, or like if I want to go global, what type of things do I need to think about like in the early development stage, which can help me later on when we have the finished product. So then I kind of realized that that was more of my calling. And to understand more and have like a more in-depth knowledge, I decided to pursue my master's in the US. And here I've been working with multiple kinds of like devices, like with surgical eye implants, virtual
Interesting.
reality based headsets for glaucoma detection, and also with remote patient monitoring systems for cardiovascular diagnosis and all of that. So I think coming from a biopharma background to a completely medical device and now a digital health background, and now I'm also involved in AI ML as well, where I'm actually giving a session on how to incorporate regulatory considerations in design development for AI systems used in healthcare. So I think the journey has been very fast in the last 2 years, and I would encourage everyone to understand their dreams and take action accordingly.
That's really wonderful. So many insights and so many learnings you have had throughout your journey. And I'm just fascinated by you have moved to different segments of healthcare, right? You were
Exactly.
in medtech, you
Exactly.
were in pharma, you were in AI, ML. So is the product management life cycle of individual segments completely different? Or how do you really come up to designing a product and how it differs from India and the US itself?
So, based on my experience, like with different kind of countries and their regulations, like one thing which I can see, which is very kind of very evident, is risk
Mhm,
management and
mhm,
all these things of classification of medical devices. And accordingly, the higher risk medical devices, they have different kinds of regulations, like stricter regulations, like on a very general level. So across the countries, wherever you'll go, you'll find certain aspects which are very similar. So, like for example, risk-based classification and registration, product development in terms of like design planning, having technical files to show evidence that firstly, you have thought about designing a product, and secondly, that you're doing it the way that you have claimed it to be. And also
Right.
defining the intended use and the indications for use of a product right at the beginning of the life cycle is highly encouraged across. And finally, doing verification and validation and having those files ready to submit to the FDA or whichever regulatory body you are dealing with. And I think now there is a greater emphasis of harmonization across different regulatory bodies, because it's like, okay, I submitted something to the FDA, now I have to do something different for the EU, I have to do something different for India. And that's why the MD-SAP is like another very successful example of how 6 countries have kind of agreed that, okay, like, if one of them gets like audits, one of those countries audits a particular organization, the others will accept it. So, and then there's also this other kind of, I can see a kind of harmonization happening even in the AI systems, even though the regulations are not that clear right now. Many countries, in fact, Saudi Arabia also, like, they point out to the WHO's guidelines for ethical use of AI. And the 6 principles are echoed in almost all the standards and regulations which are being framed. One example being the EU AI Act, which also talks of a risk-based classification of AI systems based on intended use. So we see a kind of like agreement, not really a formal agreement, but like a informal agreement where people are like, they are encouraging manufacturers to establish their concept design, their design planning, product design, and verification. And as you go in different healthcare industries, of course, the nuances change, but from a high level, it does remain the same.
So, just I'm sorry to interrupt, but like, can you elaborate on the MD-SAP? I think that's what you said, which is like a collaboration of 6 countries. So you're saying that it's kind of like a universal stamp that if you're, if you're approved in this one country, um, you're approved across the board. Is that how it works? And what are those 6 countries? Like, just I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
sure. So the MDSAP, it's not really an approval or registration, it's an audit program. So in the sense
Okay.
that, so the 6 countries I think are US, Europe, Brazil, Canada, EU, and Australia. Yeah.
Okay.
So and what happened? And in fact, in Canada, before they had their own CMDR, like their own, like, I mean, they have the regulations, right? But they also now need an MDSAP like an
Approval.
MDSAP that you have passed that audit basically.
Mm.
And so the thing is that registration becomes in different countries becomes much easier if you are MDSAP certified. So yeah.
But so this is different from the FDA approval. Like if the MD-SAP is an audit that it's kind of like a level of, it's like a certification that, okay, we've done the due diligence and this is awesome. But this is very different from the actual approval in the
Yes.
individual countries. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you for
So, like,
clarifying.
so for
Yeah.
example, when you submit something to the FDA or any other country, like, that is registration. Like, you're
Right.
registering your product. But after that, the FDA or any other body, like whichever you're dealing with, they can come into your premises. They might they might do an audit with you. They might do an
Right.
inspection with you. So the MDSAP kind of simplifies that because
Simplifies it.
it's
Right.
a bit
You've
tough
already done all
to
the due diligence. Right.
exactly. And like
I see.
you can like kind of, it's a more convincing and higher grade
Got it.
kind of certification, which is very aligned with another certification which is very popular called 134 ISO 13485. But yes, and if you go on the FDA website, you'll see this MDSAP audit approach. It's huge, and it kind of shows which clauses in ISO 13485 are applicable and which countries have different kind of requirements, country-specific requirements
Okay.
for
Mhm.
those particular clauses as well. So again, depending on whichever country you would market at, you would have to consider those country-specific requirements as well.
So
I
if we
see.
had to take a product itself, first it goes through, let's imagine it's in the US. A product gets registered in FDA, eventually going for audit with the MDSAP or ISO related body, right? And that's a repeat process. So that's the whole journey of a product, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, so again, like it depends on where you market your product. So if you're
Mhm.
in the US, I mean, you may choose to not do an MDSAP audit as well. It's not like a necessity, but um, as I said,
It's
in
a gold
Canada,
standard.
it's sometimes, yeah, and also like the registration is much simplified in certain cases. So yeah.
That's actually very interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
But now, when there's so many regulations going on, right? How do we get to really designing the product from scratch? Am I like, if I want to get into the health tech space, if I'm really passionate about solving a problem, how do I get started with it to create the first prototype to align with the manufacturing unit? It becomes a very complex task to do, and because health tech startups are not getting enough funding, although they
Mhm.
are getting funded, but not that well.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And I think as every product starts, it would start from the R&D phase. And in the R&D phase also, there would be multiple phases. So one would be like where you're just doing your proof of concept testing, which is like, okay, I have an idea. Let's see if it just works. That's it.
Hmm.
And then the next stage would be like your the prototype and minimum viable product, which would be like the minimum viable product is something that like if it kind of works in a greater sense, like, and prototype is when it has like more features to it, but all of these are like not the final commercial grade product which you would
Mhm.
be distributing to your patients. So the thing that most companies they kind of are, like there's a little gray area over there, which is like, when do we start documenting, when do we start thinking about
Hmm.
um, these our final end goals? Because when you're starting off with a product, you don't really know where it will go, and you don't really know who your end users will be, like
Hmm.
especially when you're in your proof of concept phase. So I would say that even though formal design controls are not necessary right in the beginning, but you should have like an understanding and documentation of your intended cues, your indications for use. You can even do research on the applicable standards which are relevant. So one example is, if you're using a battery, then
Hmm.
you can see what international standards are out there which talk about, like, what kind of protections are needed for use of a battery, or like what safeguards do you need, and
Hmm.
and also like design your design inputs based on your user needs. So again, doing market research to find out what your user needs are, and then framing design inputs which are more technical. So one
Hmm.
example is, if the user says that, if the user is, say, a physician who needs a scalpel, like, and says that, oh, the scalpel must fit in my hand, that's a user need. But
Hmm.
then your design input would be that the scalpel must be made of, say, stainless steel, and
Hmm.
it has to have a diameter of X and length of Y. So this kind of like you're making different levels of understanding, where you're starting off at a qualitative level where it's like mostly about, this is what my user needs, and
Mhm.
then you're breaking it down to more engineering specific terms, like
Hmm.
it has to be of this certain caliber or this certain measurements and stuff like that. So, and when you manufacture something, that would be your like design output, and you verify whether that output meets the input. So in this case, the output would be, okay, a scalpel is manufactured, is it of the length X or and diameter Y?
Mhm.
But
Hmm.
validation happens when you're finally done with all of these parts of the design process, and you go
Mhm.
back to the start and you kind of see if the product meets the user needs or not. So maybe you've
Hmm.
made a product like a scalpel in this case, which is of stainless steel, has length X, diameter Y, but it still does not meet the user needs for some reason. Maybe it's hard to hold, maybe it's slippery, maybe some other things have happened during the manufacturing process which you've not accounted for. So you need to like go back to the start as well. And one other important thing which I would like to emphasize is weaving in risk at every process of your journey. Like whenever you make any changes, assess the risk. And it's not that you have to like always do something about it. If it's a negligible risk, then you don't really, just have to document that it's not that, like it's not going to affect the product that much, or it's not like very critical. So you need to have the justification, because if a regulator asks you or an auditor asks you that why did you do this and what made you change, say, the material of something, and you need to show that, okay, like we did this because we did the risk assessment and we found that, you know, this is a critical problem, and so we had to change our design. And establishing roles as well and accountability is also important, because especially in the R&D phase, people are like, okay, let's just play around with the technology, which is very
Yeah,
valid. But
that's what I've been doing for a while. I've just
yeah,
been playing with like technologies.
Yeah.
yeah. So that's exactly how like new products like develop, and that's how you should be
Of
playing
course.
around. But you should also establish accountability and roles, and also when you plan, who should be on the design plan, who should be on those change review boards. You should have those sorted out before, because otherwise it would just be that, you know, maybe 3 or 4 people are meeting and not the entire cross collaborative team. So that would not put certain perspectives into the picture, and it might pan out later on in your product cycle, like maybe not in that particular time but later on. So yeah.
Okay, that's actually very interesting. I had one question. So basically, when we compare different sorts of startups in different industries, I'm not talking about health tech, right? MVP is just an MVP. Now in healthcare, you said proof of concept, you said MVP, you said prototype. Is there validation required in each stage, or what is the difference between all these?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like and this is like my interpretation, but like proof of concept is like when you're just testing and developing a concept and you just want to see if it works or not. Prototypes
Let's
and
take an
MVP. Yeah, I'm sorry.
let's
Yeah.
take an example of a band-aid. Very simple. Yeah. So
Yeah. So okay, like for, I think for a band-aid, the proof of concept is if it sticks or not, maybe, or like if it just covers the wound or not. I mean, it would just be like you would test your adhesive material in this case.
Like, is the
Your
primary
prototype.
outcome met? Like, is the primary outcome met? Like, I guess that's what you're testing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like what does the technology work? In this case, if it would be, say, a waterproof band-aid, does it resist water? That's it. Does it stick even though there's water? Your prototype would be closer to the final product, so it would be okay, it would have a certain width and dimension, and also it would build upon your proof of concept. So again, it would be waterproof, it would stick despite water. But your final product would be on your user needs as well. So for example, if you are, say, marketing it for say a population which is geriatric, and they might have problems in pulling the paper off of the band-aid, so you would have to account that in your design as well.
But
You
that happens
cannot.
at the very end. That's what you're saying. That
Yes.
happens. Those tweaks happen at the very end.
Yes. So
Okay.
as you are moving along in your product development cycle, you will encounter changes, and that is fine. But you need to document those changes properly, and you need to always keep in touch with your user needs. That the change might be great, but is it relevant to the population that you are serving it to? Is it something which still aligns with that? And that is how, like, your design history file, it has all of these things, like the design inputs which I just mentioned, and and that would be your like guiding light in understanding if your product is um kind of meeting your end goals or not.
Okay, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. I always had a question, right? So when we have a product, we always require validation. I know Sharan has been involved in a lot of research. So how does that comply with research, validation, and product? Sharan, you have some insights
Yeah.
or?
So I
Yeah,
basically
sure.
I what the exact building on what Mohit was just asking you. Like I think a more specific question would be like, okay, as you said, there are like let's broadly speaking, you would define three different stages of the cycle. You have the proof of concept, the prototype, and then the final product that you're pushing out, right? So are the are the testing and reiteration cycles, how are they different at each stage? Like that's something I would like to know. And I mean, I think you've talked a lot about how how important documentation is, and I don't think we need to like kind of cover that again. But what I would like to know is, do you think it's safer to build a product that is directed towards a niche population, and as you said, like, or is it, do you think it's easier to get, it's easier to get, like, is there any difference when it comes to like approvals also when it's more general purpose versus when it's more niche? Like I think those are the two things that I'd like to know.
Yeah, so from an approval perspective, for sure. So I think there's a humanitarian device exemption HDE or something, and I I'm not sure, but I think it's like 8,000 people per year should be affected by a particular disease. And don't quote me on this particular number, but it's all
Mhm.
there on the FDA website. Where so basically, if your device um caters to a population has a which is afflicted with a disease which affects, I think, 8,000 people or less in a year, then
Mhm.
you can have like it's more accelerated. Like the FDA gives you more priority in terms of review. So
Interesting.
that yeah, so and that thing is applicable for other countries. I mean, in some other countries as well. Again, it's country specific requirements, but um yeah, so that's one angle to your question. And I think the second part of your question was that whether you need to do verification and validation at every stage or not. So again, like when you kind of have your commercial grade or manufacturing equivalent product,
Hmm.
you must do validation and verification and validation at those stages. And you
Hmm.
should also verify other parts of your product. So for example, not just the like, I mean, every product, it has like, say, hardware requirements, and it has like software requirements and other kind of requirements. So you need to verify at each step, like when you're progressing, that is it meeting the requirement or not. So for example,
Hmm.
if you have a software requirement that like two-factor authentication is required,
Hmm.
and you develop this software which is either used in the manufacturing and operations of your product or in the product itself,
Hmm.
and you need to test whether it really requires two-factor authentication. So that is an example of verification, and
Hmm.
that is something that you definitely need to do when you are making a manufacturing equivalent uh, product. And that maybe like from your prototype, it's a step ahead, because
Yeah.
you now know that, okay, this is what I'm going to make, this is what
Right.
I am. And at that stage, you're like, okay, now I'm going to look for suppliers who can give me exactly this
Right.
grade of material, exactly this, like you already have said everything, you're like, I'm going to make this exactly. So that's when it is extremely important to do it. Yeah.
Okay.
But it is advisable to keep doing it like in the previous stages also, just so that you don't make a lot of mistakes later on and you have it all
Exactly.
documented. Right. Okay.
Exactly.
Got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
yeah, that was very interesting. Thank you.
But that doesn't that increase the cost of prototyping initially? I mean, the goal of an MVP is to the goal of an MVP is to test the market really well, right? So how can health tech startups, med tech startups, AI startups in healthcare really make a very cost-effective prototype? Or is just expensive in general? Because of the regulations, we have to make it a prototype that is manufacturing equivalent.
So as I said, like the final test, like your biocompatibility tests and like all of those tests, those have to be done on your manufacturing equivalent. And
I see.
you can like not do it on your prototype because it doesn't make sense, because that is not
Mhm.
what you will be releasing into the market. So
Anyways, right.
you don't need to uh like, I mean, you would need to do it only on the thing that you would be marketing finally. And
Mm-hmm.
you're in prototype, you would be kind of like, just as you mentioned, like just scoping your market and figuring out and like making a bare skeleton. Your prototype would be a bare skeleton of your final product. So at that stage you would just need to kind of fix what your requirements would be,
Okay.
what your design inputs would be, what your like what kind of materials or other components you're thinking, what consumables of your products you're thinking about. So those might vary, and you don't need to like, I mean, you need to verify whether you're on the right track or not, but the
For sure.
final expensive tests which you're talking about should be on the final
Fine.
marketed, yeah, product. So you don't need to like, you don't, I think in my opinion, you don't need to do a biocompatibility test on a prototype because you're not even
Right.
sure what material you'll be using at that stage.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh, the most important
Uh,
aspect is aligning with the user needs, I believe, if I'm not wrong.
and
Or, yeah.
Yes.
I think to take that one step forward, I just have one last question, and then I think we can move on. Um, the so help me understand this. When you're like, let's say I want to design, as you said, a waterproof band-aid, right? Do I do I do like a market survey, design what I want to design, and then retrospectively take into account all the FDA regulations and all of that? Or do I look at the regulations first, see what's possible, and then look at what I can like do I define the boundaries of my product first and then design it, or do I design it and then retrospectively change it to fit into what's approvable and what's not approvable? um like
Okay.
what
Yeah.
is your, you know what I'm trying to understand, like
Yeah, I
what
see.
would your
When
approach
you
be?
put,
Yeah.
yeah, so basically, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think your question means, when do you think about regulations in your
Yes.
design development? Where do you
Yes,
place it exactly?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
do I start with it, or do I like retrospectively end with it and then like change things around? Yes.
yeah, so I think it is more expensive if you put regulatory in the end, because
Right.
again, you've finished all your design and development, and now you're like, oh, the FDA wants this from me. I didn't think about that when I was
I
making it.
see.
So
I see.
it's always good, yeah, so it's always good to have like regulatory support, like from your
Day
phase
one.
zero, like
For
from the
sure.
very point when you are developing your product. And I think I mentioned
Mm.
that you should also scope the applicable standards, and even for the FDA, like you need a product code for every product, and in particular to each product code you would have certain specific requirements. So, and in fact, you can even call up the FDA and even have like uh, pre-submission
Conversation with them.
meetings with them, where you
Right.
can kind of talk about your product with them and say that, hey,
Right.
this is how we are thinking. What do you think? So,
Right.
and then you can go from there. So the regulatory staff
That's it.
would be responsible in that communication and everything. And so, and you should all, like most documents, like especially when you're changing something and you have to do say risk assessment or something, they have to be signed off by someone from regulatory and quality, because they are like the responsible roles in that situation. So
Right.
you need
Right.
to
Right.
incorporate them from the start, and
Mhm.
so that it's not too expensive later, and you are
Mhm.
also mentally and ready for the timeline that it would probably take to get it out into the market, and you can kind of put more reasonable expectations to your investors as to what the expected timeline and cost would be.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And one more question I had was, the market needs are constantly changing every day, and new technologies are going very rapidly. They're growing rapidly, faster than the FDA regulations. So how does this, how in the future it will actually impact the development cycle of a product? Will it be more expensive? Because if you're implementing AI in a device, or if you're implementing, if you're just changing the design in order to make it easy for the user. So how does the development cycle change? Does it become slower? How does it impact the whole development process?
Yeah, so specifically for AI products, like there, as I mentioned, there's not really like the EU AI Act is probably the most global,
Comprehensive.
like a
Yeah.
globally impactful regulation, I would say.
Hmm.
But as I think we were mentioning, like regulatory sandboxes are like something which is very upcoming. They've been used in fintech, and
Hmm.
I think countries like in the US and in Singapore and even UK especially are using these as ways to kind of have a more to and fro interaction instead of like a siloed interaction. So just
Hmm.
like a sandbox, you can play around in a sandbox kind of thing. So it's similar here where you would suppose you have a technological improvement or
Hmm.
to your product, and so it would be version 1.2 instead of 1.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then the regulator would be like, okay, so if they are okay with it or not. And in fact, to reduce this burden, the US in the US, like there's this recent guidance which came out, which is the predetermined change control plan, where I think when you're submitting a submission like to the FDA, you also kind of say that, okay, these are also the proposed things that we might change.
Hmm.
And so it's just giving more awareness to the FDA on what you might be changing based on the current market and to stay competitive in that market. So um, yeah, so I think regulatory sandboxes is like really an upcoming thing. And
Hmm.
uh, as I said, like doing, and there are many multiple templates and hand guides also out there, like which by the HHS, and also even companies like Microsoft. Like I've seen they have like really good risk assessment templates where which kind of merit a cross collaborative. So imagine like a team of cross-functional people in a room, and they
Hmm.
have the template, and they're all filling it out together. That's how it should
Hmm.
look like, because
Hmm.
that's how risk assessment in general should look like. So um so even with AI, I know it's a new technology, but it still has the same kind of expectations on certain senses, like the design inputs and all of that. It would still be the same. The things which would be different is probably the change review and how do we assess risk and some other factors of that sort.
But
Mhm.
okay, so taking the AI discussion forward a little bit, right? I've had the good opportunity to observe the AI space very closely. I've been working with a company called Inference, which is an AI healthcare startup in Boston, right? And having observed what they do very closely, I feel like, as you said, I think one of the biggest differences that AI has from other like medical technologies in general would be
Hmm.
how quickly it is getting better and how quickly it is evolving, right? Like
Yeah.
what we had 2 years ago, like if you think about something like let's say like a pacemaker or a band-aid, right? It's not in 6 months, you're not gonna have technological leaps that completely blow apart. You're not gonna have like a band-aid and in 6 months you're gonna have like a super band-aid that heals everything in a day. That doesn't happen, right?
Mhm.
But the problem with AI is that it's evolving so quickly that it's hard to keep up. And as you said, the EU Act is probably something that's very comprehensive. But do you like have any suggestions when it comes to like, okay, what more can humans in general, what should they be doing? Number one, and we've talked about what they are doing, and you've talked about the regulatory sandboxes. I feel like they're still not going to be able to keep up with the pace of innovation and
Hmm.
how quickly we're going to be rolling things out, right? So what more should they be doing? I think that's my question to
Yeah,
you, because of
that's
the especially because of the pace, right? Especially because of the pace.
that's a great question, and I that's like that's the question most people are asking now.
Yeah.
So thank you for asking that. I feel that because these systems are going to be deployed in clinical settings,
Hmm.
so firstly, finding out like three key aspects is important. That if like finding
Mm.
out if your AI technology has a clinical association, whether it can be validated and
Mm-hmm.
what kind of factors do you need to ensure that they are kind of representative. So
Mm-hmm.
for saying representative, I mean that they are robust, they are fair, they don't have bias, and for all of these things, you can generate metrics of some sorts, and you can show that, say, a refined model is working better than the previous one. So,
But like
or
most
like
companies, but the thing about metrics is like most companies will just generate their own metrics and say, "Oh, look, we're the best."
exactly,
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
how do you validate that? That's the biggest question because the regulators don't really understand the technology enough to
Mhm.
have a mechanism in place. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. What should we
Yeah,
be doing better?
so there are actually standards out there, and I can send the links later. But there are ISO/IC standards out there which talk a
Okay.
little bit about data quality and like what you should be measuring. And you can't just, as you said, you can just put any metric and be like, okay, like so we are meeting that metric. But how do you
Exactly.
come to that metric? That is also something that you need to think about. And some of these standards, they do talk about how to arrive at that conclusion. And again, like for clinical validation especially, using pre-market and post-market data is something,
Right.
and also referencing it to the studies uh, which have been conducted with devices similar to your intended use is
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
something which is, so basically kind of using a reference point. So let me give you an example. If you say an AI, um, it scans images and then
Mm-hmm.
it gives your gives a diagnosis,
Right.
and then you there's this constant thing that I'm saying, which is like a versus thing, like a physician versus AI.
Right.
But
You're validating
yeah,
it
but you should
across physicians, but then you're saying you should also be validating it across existing technologies and existing other AIs for reference, like to like a full uh put it into context essentially.
Physician
kind
versus,
of, yes.
yeah.
Yeah, so but you should also see how like how it would benefit the physician as well instead of like versus. That
Okay.
is one thing which I wanted to say. And the second is that like using evidence, like or evidence of, say, label reference data sets,
Right.
uh,
Right.
that
Right.
would really help, because um, that would and that would kind of help you in help the end user understand, suppose what kind of data it has been trained on, whether there's any bias or not.
Right.
So these questions, they're
Mhm.
inherently coming from data quality, if you see.
Correct.
So
Yes, exactly. Exactly. You're
and
right.
again, if you go back to the concept of user needs and design inputs, which we were talking about, like that is exactly when you should be thinking about your user needs. Where do you want to launch this product? And that is, in that case, your data
Amazing.
quality and would be a part of your design input. You would not accept a certain data quality if it did not meet a certain standard. So if you would
It's
say have 100 sets, you would be like, and if suppose it's getting deployed in US and in India or in Africa or wherever, like
you're
you
not
would,
gonna have coherence. You're
Right.
right.
And that
yeah, so you need equal representation, or if equal is not the right word
Right.
probably, but like equitable
Equitable
representation.
representation. Equitable
Exactly,
representation is I think the word you're looking for. Right.
exactly, yeah.
Fascinating.
that
Fascinating.
Yeah, and that becomes a very complex task if you see, right? So
Exactly.
I've been reading the healthcare space, and most of the startups or companies are progressing towards data engineering rather than really developing algorithms. So that's where I see the business opportunity is there because data quality is substandard.
It's a problem,
There's no
yeah.
reference point, and that's where the revenue is. It's not in developing algorithms and getting it FDA approved. What are your thoughts on it? Because there's so much poor quality data
You're
on
so
the business
right, man.
side,
You're so right.
and
Yeah,
funding.
I
Yeah,
uh yeah, so I agree with you guys that like data quality is something which is still not, and I think one of the biggest examples is like in India now they're setting up, I think recently there's some news on making digitized prescriptions.
Yes.
And
Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes. They're setting it, they're basically digitizing the end. They've been doing that for a while, but they're kind of like centralizing the whole thing now. That's
Mm-hmm.
the yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and but like when I was a kid, I and I think most people can speak to this. Most of my prescriptions were written on hand, and
For
I
sure.
don't have any records,
For sure.
from a formal perspective. And the other thing which I would like to highlight is that of course, like AI in healthcare, it would require good data quality, but also permissions is also another thing, which
Right.
is an interconnected apps, and that's a whole different. Like we can have a different conversation on that, um, but the data privacy and security, and
That's yeah. Yeah.
there were like some cybersecurity breaches in the US as well. So
Right.
um, um, as I said, like having before thinking about uh, and I know AI is like rapidly expanding and it's like going all across in everything, but having secure systems is also very important design requirement, system requirement, which companies should think about cybersecurity in general.
You
Um,
know,
and
I,
how
I,
they
I
can.
I think this is a space that, physicians should be leading with engineers, kind of making sure that everything is secure because physicians understand what de-identified, EHR data looks like and what kind of information is personal and impersonal. And then the engineers can come in and actually design systems that incorporate those laws or those rules for privacy and keep those things intact and then train what they do. I think this is a fascinating space where where we're gonna see a lot of collaboration between these two,
Yeah.
like the
Yes.
engineering and the health space. And I think it's a space we're gonna be watching for a very long time to come.
Or
What do you think,
medical
Moses?
students should also be taught engineering.
Oh, dude, 100%. I'm a huge advocate for that.
Yeah,
You should
and
be learning about the newest technologies.
and
100%.
Singapore actually
Yeah.
already started using AI in their education system, which is quite fascinating.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So,
Dude, yeah.
I had also come across like, as you mentioned, data collection is a big problem, right? Comparing India with not established electronic health records to US with established electronic health records to UK, which both are used, paper and electronic health records. Uh,
Right.
how do we adapt data collection process to the local population itself, like to the local
Mm,
needs? That is also a very important thing. In fact, I was discussing with Ati the other day. I had come across a company in Africa. I think so, Kenya, rural Kenya. So what they do is, in order to improvise their immunization reminders, they made an
right.
OCR system. OCR system is very old, right? Optical character recognition. So they just
Right.
schedule it on a paper. It's called smart paper. It's nothing. It's just a paper with with you circle it,
Right, right.
scan it
This is like
through,
the TV program. Right, 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 right,
and it automatically sends reminders to the mobile analog phones
right.
to rural areas. That's
Amazing.
a good way of
Unbelievable.
data collection. Imagine if we adapt how to collect data rather than really forcing EHR systems everywhere. That would make a difference.
Yes.
It's kind of
But
it's
again,
kind of
from
making solutions that are contextual to a country rather than taking
Mhm.
like telling Epic that you have a universal license, go bonkers. You're gonna have Epic everywhere. I think that's not the way forward. I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, that's what
Yes,
I was saying.
exactly. And I would also like to add, like, with like in the conversation of data collection and data quality, again, like there are other regulations also on like
Oh,
how to, as you said, anonymize data, and like
De-identified, yeah.
and there's this, and also the patient consent, and
Mhm.
another thing which is kind of a bit worrisome is uh interconnection of certain industries to the other. So, for an example, is that there was recently um the Department of Justice lawsuit here, anti-kickback lawsuit, which happened,
Mhm.
where one of the AI systems was proposing diagnosis which were favorable to certain medications,
oh,
and that's
That's
another ball game. So,
That's
again, like
always gonna
top.
happen. That's like paying Google. That's like paying Google. That's like when you look up something on Google and you're paying Google for ads.
It
That's what's gonna
biases
happen with
the
AI.
exactly,
Yes,
it
because
biases
it
the
is, of
search
course, of
result.
course.
Yes. So
I mean, but
again, so
that's
when
not
you
something we can stop, right? Like that's not something we're gonna be able to stop.
yeah, true.
yeah,
It'll be another AdWords. for health tech.
So
Exactly.
yeah, so when and I think the way that case transpired out was that someone, I think, was a whistleblower, or if like eventually the Department of Justice came in and everything got sorted. But uh things like this are things which are a little worrisome, and that's where your security comes into play, and that is
Yeah.
where like the thing of biasness again, like in this case, say the algorithm was biased towards a certain medication type, and you, if you would have the proper data to establish that it's not that way, and that um the output is something which is not like the output, the output of the algorithm is something which
It's genuine.
statistically using
Right.
statistics, you can show that it's not something which is biased towards something or against. So
So I think
and
what you're
if
trying
the
to
model
say,
is explainable, I'm sorry,
I, sorry, yeah, I think what you're trying to essentially say is the result is not enough. You need to be able to show how you got there.
exactly.
And if you're able to like show how you got there to everybody, not just at the FDA level, but everybody, then there's no way that you can, you have like do shady business like this,
Yeah.
where you have like
Hmm.
Healthcare industry.
specific data, exactly, like biased data sets that are kind of prescribing your medication. So
Yes.
I think that's a fantastic point, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And so, Ati, diving back, I just wanted to understand the broader overview of the regulations in different countries. UAE, Saudi, maybe compared to US and EU in general, very broad. So it can be a sort of a guidance for anyone actually entering the healthcare space to innovate something. Because I've realized that in US it's FDA class 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And
One, two, and three actually, but yeah.
oh, sorry. Four is okay. 1, 2, 3, and 1 and 2 is where most of the companies are. Three is hardly people make it; they fail before that. So, so how do you give us a broad overview of that?
Yeah, so actually summarizing it would be a bit tough because of the nuances, and that would take a long time. But
Right.
yeah, in general, like in the US, there's class one, two, and three, and as you said, one and two are like they're all, and so as I said, like all of them are risk-based classifications. So the higher the class, the higher the risk. And I think for the US, like all these classes are like they are um mandated to follow general controls, and then class 2 has like special controls. And even for every product you have a product code, and depending on the product code you would have certain specific regulations for that particular product as well. And a nice way to actually figure out how your product is in the grand scheme of things is maybe look for a competitor product or a predicate device, which we call here,
Mm.
and search that, see how what class it falls under, or like what product codes are applicable to it, and figure out these links are usually on the FDA website, so anyone can access them, and they can, like, it's again, as I said, a context specific question. But yeah, that's in general for the US. And in India, for example, if you want to if you are a manufacturer outside India, you would have to have an import license, and there are like four types of licenses, and depending on what your final use case would be. Um,
Mhm.
and mostly there's a Sugam portal which is maintained by the CDSCO, and um, that's where you would have to fill out some administrative forms. The most important thing is to figure out who your authorized representative would be, and this applies to like wherever you sell, which is not in your country of origin of manufacture. So like if you are selling or exporting your product, which in the country's perspective, importing the
Yeah,
product,
yeah,
you would need to have an authorized representative or a person of contact in that sense. So who would be importing or sometimes even distributing the particular product. And in Saudi, before they were following the GHTF guidelines, but now they have their own new revamped guidelines across. And the Saudi FDA is very similar to the principles which are present in the EU MDR right now.
Mhm.
So most people are like, okay, if you are preparing an EU MDR submission, then some parts, of course, are very different in Saudi, like which
Yeah.
are very case specific again, but regarding the administrative parts.
Mhm.
But in general, the essential principles, the conformity assessment, all of that, the labeling, those things are also something very specific to countries. Like labeling, what you need to put on the label is different for different countries.
For the market.
And yeah, and also like along with the labeling, you have like information packets also, and that is also very specific to countries where in certain cases it may not need to reach the end user, but in certain cases it must. There's the concept of
Right.
EIFUs, uh, and also paper based, and translation is another big deal, because in countries where, like in China, like they would need to use
Mandarin.
Mandarin, and even the official languages, like in Switzerland, they have three official languages, so they
Right.
expect you to translate all of those things. So
Okay.
these are like just some examples of like how uh, diverse the space is right now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And
But okay, so I'm sorry, go on.
yeah. And due to rapid technology changes, are regulatory frameworks adapting, or we are slow? We're still at the early stages where we have to always cope up with the regulations. We can't move with the technology. We have to move with the regulations rather. I would point it out as that.
Not really. So like there are like, it's always so contrary to the popular belief where people are like, oh, regulations won't change. The thing is that regulations are difficult to change, but uh, regulatory bodies release guidances and like rules
Mhm.
which kind of are specific to certain categories of technology and product.
Mhm.
So for example, the PCCP, which I mentioned, it's a guidance,
Mhm.
and
Right.
it's not really a law yet, but it is friendly towards AIML health tech companies. So again, like you can have pre-submission meetings with almost, I think, all of the regulatory bodies out there, and in that discussion, your regulatory person needs to communicate what your technology wants to do and what considerations you're thinking about, and whether that body is fine with it or not. So
Mhm.
um yeah, so the things that we discussed today were mostly overarching general things which are
Yeah.
expected, and which they kind of need you to do, but there are certain things um which are again very, very case specific. So
Right.
um yeah.
Of course. So I think I have one question with regard, because we're talking about different agencies and different parts of the world. Do you think do you think like there's like a specific country or a specific agency, okay, if you can get an approval from there, then that you can use that like as a rubber stamp and kind of go to somebody, like for example, if a company comes on Shark Tank and gets the validation from the sharks, and they raise some money, and then it
Yeah.
becomes easier for them to raise more money going forward, right? So
Mhm.
is it like, okay, if you've been approved by like the EU, and then you come to India or Saudi Arabia and you're like, oh, we already have approval here, so does that like does I'm sure they have their own like paperwork and due diligence, but does it help, or is every country is like, no, you have to start from scratch every single time?
No, actually, it's very friendly that way. So,
Okay. Yeah.
if you have approval in the US, it's actually very beneficial in other countries,
Okay.
especially because, again, coming back to MD SAP, and there's another concept called MD SAP affiliate nations, which are not really members of the MD SAP. So, six members are the members of the MD SAP, and affiliate nations are not really members, but they are kind of aligned on the same goals. And Israel, for example, it is very okay, like if you like there are much lesser stringent regulations if you already have a US approval. So, and the
It's
same
easier, you're
in
saying.
India.
It's a smoother process, is what you're
It's a
saying.
smoother process, yes. And
Okay.
there are, even in Australia, there are accelerated, expedited, I think the word was expedited,
Hmm.
approval pathways as well.
Okay.
And same goes for Canada. And And I think in India, you need to have a free sale certificate. That is something which means that you need to prove that your device is also marketed where you are located.
Hmm.
And it's not that you're just sending it across India and um, it's not marketed in the country of origin. It's not like you have to have that proof as well that, that you are selling in the country of your manufacturing as well. Yeah,
Okay, so you
so
not only are you manufacturing in one country, you have to sell it there and you're like selling it elsewhere as well. Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
you have
Right.
to prove that you are selling it there, like that it's
Okay.
fine selling it in your country of origin, because sometimes those spurious products may, get diverted. If there's suppose some product is suppose not US FDA approved, and but the manufacturing is in the US, and
Hmm.
and you're selling it in India, and maybe the US did not clear it for some reason, but uh, you're kind of like sending it across to another country, so that's not safe,
Right.
right? So
That's not safe. That
that's
isn't safe. I agree.
yeah,
I
so
agree.
those are like some of the requirements which are there. But
That's
in
actually pretty
general, I
cool.
think,
I didn't think
yeah,
about that. That's actually very, very important that you have to be able to sell it in your country
Yeah.
as well. That's
yeah, yeah, that's the thing. And also like um another point which I was going to mention is that um when you are like, so again, like when we're talking about like importing and exporting and things like that, like I think now EU is really very strict, and right now with the EU MDR, because of the incidents which happened in the past. So
Mhm.
um and there's a lot of pressure right now on notified bodies to be accepted by the EU as notified bodies, which was not the case earlier. So US is probably the best way to go forward, like in my opinion right now.
Mhm.
um and then probably yeah,
Branch out.
but
I
yeah.
think so EU comes on the bottom of the list. FDA approval is the best.
No, I mean EU is actually, I
Very
think if
difficult.
you go past an EU submission,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like a gold standard in right now, because it has
Right.
all of the considerations which you would need to fulfill. And so if you are fine with that, then yeah.
Just for context, like how much would I like? I'm sure I'd need to pay like a lawyer for this whole process. And let's say I have a waterproof band-aid that's going to like change the world or something, right? But I need an approval from the US FDA. Like what, just for context, like how much do you think it's going to cost the company or cost me to get an approval? Like I'm not talking about the R&D. All of that is we're rock solid. We have a good product. We've made sure that we meet all the regulations, everything. But just for context, like how much does it cost to get a US FDA approved on average?
So it's actually publicly listed on the FDA website as to like even the registration fees is a certain amount. And if you're a small business, you can actually ask for a lesser amount to be submitted as a registration fee. So this is actually the medical device user fee amendments, and I think it depends on the application type. So and so
So
for
what's
a
like a ballpark?
510K,
Yeah.
uh,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
What's like a ballpark is what I'm asking. Like as you were saying, like what's a
So
ballpark number that you would give?
yeah, definitely for like 510K, it's around $20,000, and for
Right.
small businesses, it's around 5,000-ish currently. This is
Okay.
for a 510K, which is the most popular route. And for
Okay.
small businesses, as you can see, the gradient is much less, like
I
it's
see.
Yeah,
like
510K,
1/4 the
I
cost.
remember that because when I was working in a startup, many people adhere to the 510K, which means if there is an existing technology in the market, you get the
Mhm.
FDA approval easily.
Ah, nice.
That's a different pathway, the 510K, and
That's
we
interesting.
always took that. It was the easiest way to
That's
take it.
Yeah, 510Ks are easier in that sense. And also like if you, there's another concept called special 510Ks, which is like if you are kind of making a new change to your product,
Mhm.
uh
Mhm.
which does not merit a full submission, like a new 510K submission. If you can kind of establish that um certain
It's an
things are
adaptation.
this,
It's just
yeah,
an
so
adaptation from a completely new thing, right?
yeah, and that the performance is the same, or like even if you do a gap analysis of your new product versus the one you submitted earlier, um,
Mm.
there's not too many changes which are happening, and it is also by the same manufacturer, like it has to be from the same manufacturer. Then
Mm.
there's that concept as well. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
Mohit, if you have any more questions.
Yes, thank you. I had a question in terms of, so if we look at many companies, right, they are entering the wellness space. They're branding them as clinical wellness. Because
Mhm.
of these so many barriers, how do we progress from, I mean, how is it working right now? So because of the barriers, many people are entering the wellness space and eventually they validate and then go to the healthcare space. Or how is it progressing? Because even Apple has algorithm to detect heart rate, and it's not FDA approved.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so
you
that's
yeah.
a very interesting question. So thank you for asking. But I also agree that many companies are towing that line of like being consumer facing products than patient
Right.
facing products. The main difference, if you say that you are a patient facing product, is that you have to have kind of like, as I said, you have to have more clinical evidence
Okay.
as to
Right.
whether your target population or your users in this case are actually
Normal people.
benefiting from it. You have to do a
Right.
benefit risk assessment, all of those things which we just talked about this entire session. But um, back to your question, when you say that if it's a wellness product or not, so um, the FDA has been coming up with certain concepts like mobile health applications or mobile medical applications, I think, which are like
Mhm.
health apps kind of thing. Regulations a bit on that as well, um, which kind of give you data. And the thing is, the question in the difference is for wellness and patient facing is that who actually interprets the data? That is the question. So if it's something which the patient and the patient is not similar to a consumer. So
Okay.
if the patient who is diagnosed with something
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
is using the product, if the data or a diagnosis or some information is coming directly to that patient, then it is very much a patient related product, like it's
Mhm.
a health product.
Okay.
Like an
But if it
HbA1c monitor, for example.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Right.
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
And
exactly, someone who's diagnosed with diabetes is using it
Hmm.
and is claiming themselves to be a diabetic. So the user in
makes
this case would be diabetic. It would not be a random user. Like
yeah.
I'm saying random in the sense a diabetic or non-diabetic, either of them could use it.
So
Not that.
basically, you can't get a wellness FDA approval for that. You would need a full-fledged healthcare FDA approval for something like that. But for something like heart rate, which everybody measures, that's the metric that you can get a wellness approval on and kind of move forward. I
That's
think
what
Yeah,
companies have
again,
been doing
because
lately.
you're
interesting.
yeah,
That's so cool. That's so amazing.
be,
That's amazing.
be, yeah, because your end user in this case is so that's what I think most, even for class 2 and class 3 medical devices, some like some companies and like some most companies actually are very careful in saying that they diagnose and they assist in
Mhm.
diagnosis. So
Mm-hmm.
if you say that you diagnose something, and it means that the patient would, or the physician in that case, would be fully reliant on your product's output, which is higher risk because if it fails.
Yeah.
But if it says it is assisting and it's not replacing the physician or something of the sort, or like the physician still has to use his or her discretion, um, and the patient is also like not getting like the patient is not fully reliant on that, then it's something that um, is less risk. So that's
Got it.
how,
Makes
yeah,
sense.
that's how the
It's
space looks like.
actually it was a really insightful session, I think so.
Unbelievable.
Taran and I both enjoyed just having this wonderful
I love
conversation.
it.
We stretched more than an hour. We could continue talking for 3 hours if needed. But thank you so much for being here,
Thank you so
actually.
much.
Andy. We really appreciate it. We actually got a lot of insights, which will help us help support the audience as well into not wasting money, number one, and getting educated on the regulatory affairs itself, which makes an important aspect in innovation and how to accelerate innovation in the health tech space. Because
sure.
lately I've been seeing many healthcare startups failing, and the reason of that is definitely number one, the user testing was not that right, or maybe the regulatory framework was not adhered to it. Thank you so much for being here. So
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
same here. Thank you for
Really.
having me, and like feel free to like reach out to me if you have any questions. And this is also for the audience. If you have any questions, then feel I can share my email with Mohit and Sharan. And yeah, I love talking about these topics. So
Yeah.
yeah,
We loved it as well. Thank you so much.
I'm
thank you,
ending the
thank you. Have
recording
a
now.
great day.
Yeah, I'm just